obviously Joe Burrow's kind of flexing his muscles right now as one of the best players in the sport. CJ Stroud, like, let's face it, Ohio State guys, before that Georgia game, obviously he's a good player, but it's kind of like the Alabama thing with Tua and Mac. It's like, well, his team is so much better. His receivers are so sweet. And then that Georgia game, he's kind of parlayed that Georgia game into like, I'm a playmaker. I mean, I went back and watched all his passes in that, and I understand Tampa's, Todd Bowles, who's an awesome defensive coordinator. You put him at head coach, his defense doesn't look like it does when he's the coordinator. But still, I mean, some of those throws, that layered throw toward the end of the game that ultimately led to the touchdown in the corner at like the 11-yard line was like, damn, that looked like Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes. So CJ Stroud, I think, feels like the lock offensive rookie of the year, and just like a guy who's going to change that franchise. Him and D'Amico going to be a tandem for a long time. Cincinnati's kind of been rolling high, kicking ass, taking names the last 2 weeks. I mean, obviously kicked the shit out of the Niners. I thought last week the score was closer than the actual game that I witnessed because they shoved the Bills around. There's a big spot for the Texans, who a couple weeks ago I bet on them and they let me down. Who they lose to? Was it Carolina?
Carolina.
That was one of those. This game though, it's hard. Like, have they arrived, or are they just like a year? Are they a 7-10 team? And then next year, when they get some more picks, more free agents, they're competing to be a wild card spot. I don't know. I mean, I think this week's a big week. They go in and even just play tight. Maybe you got to take them for real as a playoff contender.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stroud is for real. I also think Tank Dell is for real. He's
stud.
He's all amazing.
Did you know about that guy in college? I didn't know that much about him.
I loved him at Houston. He was just an absolute machine. He's like a mini Tyreek in and how he can juke and get separation.
Feels like, remember when the Colts took T.Y., different player, but it was like, Jesus, this guy's good. Yep. That's what this guy, you got this guy in the third round.
Yeah, you could see it right away in his first game. But Stroud is playing. I mean, he's on pace to have one of the best rookie seasons in the history of the NFL for a quarterback. This offense is playing really well, and it all happened because of that Carolina loss. So in that game, and this has happened a few other times this year, Slowick, who's used to be with the 49ers, Shanahan disciple, sometimes he wants to establish the run, because and the 49ers can always do that. You have good backs and good offensive line, but the Texans can't really run it this year. Pierce doesn't really fit the scheme, and then your backups aren't that good. So against Carolina, he just kept trying to run it.
The Niners also have a blocking tight end in Kittle and a fullback in Juszczyk, so they got like 7 offensive linemen.
Yeah, and the best left tackle in the NFL, and like one of the best running backs. Like the Texans don't have that. They were at the Panthers. They just kept trying to run it, and then it's like, please open up the offense. Last week, all early down throws, and they gave Stroud the keys, and they
let him sling it.
Threw for 450 yards. D'Amico came out after and said, "Yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to rely on our strengths." So I'm confident they're going to come out here and let Stroud throw. And this Bengals defense is vulnerable. Look, they lost both their safeties from last year. Last year, they played like 10 backup quarterbacks. Their coordinator is very good in Arumo. But the secondary, I think, is overrated. And look, they've been getting so lucky, their defense. You meant go back to the 49ers game. The 49ers had 460 yards in that game, for what it's worth. McCaffrey fumble inside the 10. You had a freak pick by the defensive lineman. Go back a week before that. The Bills also freak fumble in the red zone.
Purdy threw for 350 yards in that game.
Yeah, torched them. Back to Seattle Cincy game. Seattle doubled up Cincy in yards, had 400 yards, only scored 17 points. They didn't score. They didn't score in the red zone 5 times. The last 2 drives ended in the red zone with no points, turned it over on downs. They have been getting so lucky. So if you remove, so you can look at, EPA per play on defense. Bengals around middle of the pack defense. But if you remove turnovers and the impact of turnovers, which a lot of times are just fluky, they dropped to 25th, 24th against the pass. So this defense is vulnerable, and they've been getting away with it. It's also a bad spot for Cincy. Come off that big win against the Bills. You have the Ravens next week. Could come out a little flat here. Jamar Chase also might not play, which would be huge. So you can get there's a +7 -115 out there. I pay for the 7 up to -120. I think it's worth it in this spot. And Zach Taylor, he's only 2-5, small sample size, 2-5 against the spread as a favorite of a touchdown or more. When they get a lead, they get a little bit too conservative, and then they don't let Burrow cook. And Burrow's cooking now. I mean, the Burrow's all the way back. This is going to be one of the best offenses in the NFL, especially when Chase is healthy. The first 6 weeks when Burrow was rusty and dealing with an injury, you can look at yards above replacement adjusted for opponent. You combine all 6 of Burrow's first starts, he was a total of 2 yards above a replacement level quarterback. 2 yards over 6 weeks. The last 2 weeks, plus 168, last week plus 192. So yeah, the Bengals offense all the way back. They're going to score here, but if they're like up, then I think that Houston's going to come out here and throw it. From everything I saw last week, all the post game comments, and they should be able to throw it on this Bengals defense. But even if they're behind, Stroud can still keep up. They'll start to pass more, and then the Bengals start to go a little bit more conservative. They start to run it. They'll punt it on like 4th and 1s. You see some of that with Shanahan and San Fran too sometimes, which is why in the past at times they haven't been great as favorites of a touchdown or more. So I just think that this is getting a touchdown with Stroud and the way this offense is playing against a defense that's been running a little too good, and it's just a good situational spot sandwiched in between Buffalo and Baltimore, and then the Chase injury. Like, even if he can go, he's probably not going to be 100%. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Makes it a lot easier on that Houston secondary. So yeah, I'll take this Houston offense, Stroud in a good spot, catching a touchdown right now. Even if they're down 10 late, I have full confidence they can get in the back door. But I think this will be a pretty competitive game, especially if Chase doesn't play.
Anything on Raiders Jets? Obviously that the first time interim head coach, you get a huge jolt. I love the Giants, and that you knew about 5 minutes into that game that was the wrong side. The Jets, I mean, you talk about whatever game you were talking about earlier today, they just didn't get the fumbles or whatever. I mean, the Jets could have had a couple picks, some fumbles just didn't quite go their way in that game against the Chargers. I wonder if that looks a little different against Aiden O'Connell, right? Do they get some of those? That's just a fascinating game. I mean, on paper, people are like Jets Raiders. I can't wait to watch that thing, because whoever wins is actually going to be feeling pretty good, especially if the Raiders win. You're like, God, is this team kind of alive now under Antonio Pierce?
Yeah, we'll see if you would have to imagine that going from
they hated that guy. They can't stop talking about how much they hate the guy.
Yeah, but then the question is like, it was Tommy DeVito, right? So
exactly.
So we'll learn a lot more this week. And look, what the Raiders do on defense is Max Crosby's a monster. And he'll make all the Raiders do is they say, you're not going to get explosive plays. It's very smart by their defensive coordinator, Graham. They say, you're not going to get any explosive plays. We don't have great secondary. We don't have great linebackers. So you're going to have to work your way down the field. And then hopefully by that time, and it's worked. It's kept them in games. All their games are like, besides last week, they're like 20-17, 20-6. They're all like low scoring games. And then hopefully, eventually Crosby will make a play, or Peters will jump a route, or you'll have an incompletion, or then you have to kick a field goal. That's what they're doing. So quarterbacks that can efficiently move the ball down the field with an efficient passing attack against elite quarterbacks, it's good. It's good. It's problematic for the Raiders. I mean, you saw that against Buffalo. Buffalo just destroyed them.
Annihilated them.
Zach Wilson's not capable of doing that. Zach Wilson's numbers against zone are and that's all the Raiders run pretty much, cover 3, are horrifying. And he's
it's why when the Chargers went up 7-0, I didn't understand. I understand you can't run the ball. Like the only way the Jets are going to be able to score is if you throw it and it tips off a hand, you get a pass rush fumble. I would ran it 3-and-out punt, 3-and-out punt. You will win the game.
Yep.
And he had 21 pass attempts in the first half, and the Jets were kind of hanging, like close couple pick sixes and fumble sixes. Like, you guys are playing into their hand. That's the only way they can survive.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to feel bad for the Jets, because they've played all these quarterbacks, and they've played them all extremely well. No one's, I mean, what did Herbert have, like 130 yards last week? So, yeah, so I don't think the Raiders offense is going to be able to do much. I don't think the Jets offense is going to be able to do much. So who's going to make the mistakes? Can Zach Wilson stay out of his own way? Yeah, I agree. It should actually be an intriguing watch. I think Zach Wilson's a 1-point favorite. If I had to, I just don't think Zach Wilson should ever be a favorite on the road. But I don't have a strong feel. It'll basically come down to like which quarterback makes a bigger mistake. Oh, the Jets defense is more likely to force it, but Zach Wilson is more likely to make it. So it's intriguing, that aspect. And also, I want to see how this Raiders team just continues to respond. So I probably won't bet it, but we'll be interested to watch.